Victoria's lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 quiet words. I watched her smile freeze, then disappear completely. Her fingers tightened around the papers she'd been so eager to sign, and for the first time, she looked afraid. My name is Crystal Cooper. Just months earlier, my own sister had stood in our family living room and declared, "The house, the cars, everything is mine." I said nothing. I let her believe I'd surrendered. But sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Before any lawyers, before any courtrooms, before words like inheritance and probate ever entered our lives, there was just the two of us. Victoria and I met in a foster home in Sacramento when we were little girls who had already learned not to expect too much from the world. We weren't biological sisters, we didn't share blood. But when you grow up sharing bunk beds and whispered fears after lights out, that kind of bond can feel stronger than anything written on paper. Then Denise walked into our lives. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She didn't make grand promises. She just showed up, steady, patient, warm. She brought structure where there had only been uncertainty. Regular dinners, homework at the kitchen table, bedtime stories read in a soft voice that made the world feel less frightening. What was supposed to be temporary slowly became permanent. She adopted us both equally without hesitation, and just like that, we were a family. Victoria and I became inseparable. We shared everything. Clothes secrets, inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. At school, we stuck together. If one of us struggled with math, the other stayed up late helping. If someone teased one of us on the playground, the other was right there, arms crossed, ready to defend. Walking home through our Sacramento neighborhood, we talk about what our lives would look like when we were older. Big houses, successful careers, maybe even running a business together one day. We used to dream as if the future belonged equally to both of us. In elementary school, our teachers often mentioned how close we were. "They're like twins," one said during a parent-teacher conference, and Denise beamed. I remember that look on her face, pride mixed with relief. We were thriving. After everything we'd been through, we were thriving. As we grew older, though, small differences started to show. I found comfort in structure. I liked planners and checklists. I liked seeing my grades lined up neatly at the top of the class roster. Studying wasn't something I had to force myself to do. It made me feel secure. If I worked hard enough, I could control at least one part of my life. Victoria was smart. No one could deny that. But she didn't approach school the same way. She preferred spontaneity. She could absorb information quickly, but she didn't always have the patience for the steady grind. At first, it didn't matter. We were both doing fine. Then, middle school turned into high school, and grades started to mean more. I began consistently earning top scores. Teachers would call my name during assemblies. I'd get invited to join academic clubs. Denise would hang report cards on the fridge like trophies, careful to celebrate both of us, but mine started stacking up more frequently. The first time I noticed something shift was the afternoon my scholarship letter arrived. It was from the local community college, a full scholarship, tuition covered. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands shaking as I read it aloud. Denise cried, actually cried. She wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe, saying how proud she was. Victoria was there too. She smiled. She clapped. She even said, "That's amazing, Crystal." But later that night, at dinner, when Denise mentioned how hard I had worked, Victoria shrugged and said almost casually, "Well, she got lucky with those teachers." It was subtle. So subtle I almost ignored it. Lucky. I laughed it off. I told her she could apply for the same scholarships, that she was just as capable. She nodded, but her eyes didn't match her smile. Over the next few months, those little comments became more frequent. If I stayed up studying, she'd joke that I was trying too hard. When I got recognized at a school board assembly, she skipped the small celebration we had afterward and said she had a headache. At family gatherings, when relatives asked about my plans, she'd suddenly go quiet. Denise tried to keep everything balanced. Birthdays were identical in effort, same size cakes, same number of gifts, same enthusiastic hugs. School events. She showed up for both of us, no exceptions. If she sensed tension, she'd gently suggest we talk it out privately. She didn't want to take sides. Maybe she was afraid that even acknowledging the jealousy would make it worse. So the tension stayed unspoken. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Siblings compete. That's normal, right? I thought once we were both out in the world, building our own lives, things would even out. But there were moments that lingered. Like the night I found her sitting alone in the living room after another award ceremony. The house was quiet. I sat beside her and said, "You know, none of this changes us." She smiled, but it was tight. "Of course it doesn't," she replied. "Why would it?" I wanted to believe her. Still, something in her tone felt edged. We were still sisters. We still lived. We were still sisters. We still lived under the same roof. But there was a new space between us, small at first, almost invisible. And the hardest part? I didn't know how to fix something that no one would admit was broken. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. The pride, the comparisons. The way praise, even when fairly given, can feel like a spotlight to one person and a shadow to another. We never had a dramatic fight back then. No screaming matches, no slammed doors. Just quiet shifts, offhand remarks. Dinners where conversation felt slightly strained. Celebrations where one of us smiled a little less brightly. It wasn't explosive. It was gradual. Like a hairline crack in glass. At first you don't notice it, but it's there. And once it forms, it never really disappears. While most kids our age were worried about prom dresses or weekend parties, I was learning how to reconcile receipts at the back counter of our first coffee shop. Mom had started it as a tiny corner place in Sacramento, just a few mismatched tables, the smell of fresh beans clinging to everything, and a handwritten menu taped to the wall. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, and eventually it became ours. After school, I'd head straight there. I'd sit with a calculator and a stack of invoices matching numbers line by line. I learned how to track inventory, how to notice when milk orders didn't line up with sales, how to catch small losses before they turned into big ones. It wasn't exciting work, but I liked the rhythm of it. Numbers made sense to me. They followed rules. As the shop got busier, Mom trusted me with more. I started posting part-time job listings at my community college, interviewing students who needed flexible hours. I trained baristas on customer service, how to greet people by name, how to handle the morning rush without losing patience, how to remake a drink without arguing if someone wasn't satisfied. It wasn't just about coffee, it was about building something steady. Over the years, that little shop grew into 3 locations. I helped negotiate better deals with suppliers, shaving costs without lowering quality. I reorganized shift schedules to reduce overtime. I'd finish my classes in the afternoon, work a closing shift, then go home and study. It was exhausting, but it felt purposeful. Victoria worked in the business too. She handled parts of operations, especially as we expanded. On the surface, it looked balanced. 2 daughters supporting their mother's dream. A family business, thriving because everyone pitched in. And in many ways, that was true. But something else was happening underneath. Whenever customers praised how smoothly things ran, Mom would smile and say, "The girls helped me so much." She never singled either of us out in public. Birthdays were still equal. Same effort, same love. If one of us got a gift, the other did too. She attended our events with the same enthusiasm. Still, the differences in how we approached things were becoming more obvious. I was the one who stayed late to double-check the books, the one who suggested small efficiency changes, the one who brought spreadsheets to family dinners because I had noticed supply costs creeping up. Victoria was charismatic. She could charm customers effortlessly. She had big ideas about expansion, about branding, about making the shops trendier. Sometimes her ideas were bold and exciting, but when Mom leaned on me to handle the fine details, the contracts, the budgeting, the hiring paperwork, I could feel the temperature in the room shift ever so slightly. It showed up in small ways. If Mom thanked me for catching an accounting error, Victoria would respond with something light but edged. "Well, someone has to be the responsible one, I guess." She'd laugh afterward like it was a joke. At dinner, when we talked about opening a 3rd location, I mentioned negotiating better bean prices before committing to a lease. Victoria rolled her eyes and said, "Not everything has to be a spreadsheet, Crystal." Mom would step in quickly. "Both of you have good points," she'd say. "That's why we make a great team." And we'd nod. Conversation would move on. Peace preserved. But unresolved tension has a way of lingering in silence. The more the business grew, the more responsibility I took on, partly because I was already handling those tasks, partly because Mom trusted my consistency. I don't think she meant to create imbalance. She just leaned toward whatever felt stable in the moment. And I was steady. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed to bristle at the growing perception that I was the dependable one. It wasn't that she didn't contribute. She did. But when praise came, even when it was shared, it seemed to land differently for her. There were evenings when we'd close up together, sweeping floors in silence. I'd try to chat about a new supplier contract or an idea for improving inventory tracking. She'd respond with short answers, then check her phone. It wasn't explosive, it was restrained. Mom saw it. I know she did. Sometimes her eyes would flick between us during tense exchanges, but she avoided confronting it head-on. Maybe she feared that calling attention to jealousy would make it real. Maybe she worried about being accused of favoritism in a family that had already begun in fragile circumstances. So she focused on harmony, equal hugs, equal praise, equal reminders that we were both loved beyond measure. And in fairness, she did love us equally. But love doesn't always cancel comparison. As the shops expanded, the roles felt more defined. I became the quiet backbone handling systems and safeguards. Victoria became the visible presence, the one with bigger visions and louder confidence. From the outside, we looked like a success story. 2 sisters helping their adoptive mother build something from nothing. A foster family turned entrepreneurial team. Inside, though, something subtle was tightening. It wasn't open hostility. It was a collection of moments. A glance held a second too long, a compliment delivered with a hint of sarcasm, a celebration where one of us clapped just a little less enthusiastically. We still worked side by side. We still called ourselves partners. But beneath the daily routines, beneath the espresso machines and supplier contracts and late-night bookkeeping, jealousy simmered quietly. And no one, not even Mom, was willing to name it out loud. The shift from tension to fracture didn't happen overnight. It came quietly, the way illness often does. Mom's health started declining slowly. At first, it was just fatigue. Then more appointments, more tests, more prescriptions lined up neatly on the kitchen counter. The woman who had once opened the coffee shop before sunrise began struggling to make it through a single afternoon without needing to rest. Because I lived closer to the house and had already adjusted my schedule around the shops, I naturally stepped in. At least that's what it felt like at the time, natural, temporary. Of course I'd help. That's what daughters do. Doctor visits became part of my weekly routine. I drove her to the local clinic in Sacramento, sitting beside her in sterile exam rooms, while specialists spoke in careful, measured tones. I learned how to ask the right questions. I kept a notebook filled with the medication changes, side effects, next steps. At home, I organized her pills into labeled containers so nothing would be missed. Morning dose, afternoon dose, evening dose. I set alarms on my phone in case she forgot. I adjusted recipes to match her dietary restrictions, measuring portions, carefully watching her face for any sign of discomfort after meals. Nights were the hardest. There were evenings when pain kept her awake, and I'd sit by her bed in the dim light, holding her hand. We'd talk about the early days of the first coffee shop, how she almost gave up after the first slow month. How proud she felt watching customers become regulars. Sometimes she'd drift off mid-sentence, her grip loosening as sleep finally won. Those moments were heavy, but they were also intimate. I felt needed. I felt close to her in a way that was both beautiful and devastating. Victoria called. That's important to say. She wasn't completely absent, but her presence felt distant. The calls were usually under 5 minutes. "How's Mom doing?" she'd ask. I'd update her on appointments, medication adjustments, any new symptoms. Then she'd sigh and say something like, "I'm swamped this week, meetings back to back." Tell her I'll visit soon. Soon rarely came. She lived only a couple of hours away. Close enough for a weekend trip, close enough for a spontaneous visit. But weeks would pass without her showing up. There was always a reason: supplier negotiations, staffing issues, urgent matters at one of the shops she oversaw. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just said, "Okay." But after hanging up, I'd return to Mom's bedside, feeling the weight of it settle deeper in my chest. Caregiving is isolating even when shared. When it isn't shared, it can feel suffocating. There were evenings when I wanted someone to take over for just an hour so I could step outside and breathe. Instead, I stayed. I reminded myself that this was temporary, that Victoria would come around, that when things got serious, she'd be there. Mom never complained about her absence, not directly. But sometimes, after a brief call ended, she'd stare at the darkened phone screen a second longer than necessary. The decline wasn't dramatic, it was gradual. A slow narrowing of her world to the walls of her bedroom, to familiar objects placed within reach. And through it all, I was there, adjusting blankets, tracking symptoms, whispering reassurances. I wasn't always sure I believed. The morning she passed was quiet. She had struggled through a particularly hard night. I stayed up making sure she was comfortable, speaking softly whenever she stirred. Just before dawn, her breathing changed. Then it slowed, then it stopped. There's a stillness in a room after someone leaves it for the last time. A silence that feels unnatural. I remember sitting there still holding her hand, trying to memorize the shape of her face without pain etched into it. The funeral brought people together from all corners of Sacramento. Customers from the coffee shops, old friends, extended relatives. Everyone had a story about her kindness, her resilience, the way she built something meaningful out of almost nothing. Victoria attended. She looked composed, distant. During the service, I noticed her checking her phone more than once. Afterwards, she approached me briefly, hugged me stiffly, and said she had to leave for a prior commitment. She didn't stay for the reception. Several relatives asked where she had gone. I offered vague explanations, work obligations, scheduling conflicts. But standing there, accepting condolences alone, I felt the distance between us widen into something undeniable. I went back to the house. That evening, exhausted beyond words. Grief has a physical weight to it. It settles into your shoulders, your spine. A few days later, while I was sorting through Mom's paperwork at the dining table, there was a knock at the door. Victoria walked in without much preamble. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood Dustin Brown, her boyfriend, a well-known estate lawyer in the Sacramento area, confident, polished, carrying a leather briefcase like he had just stepped out of a courtroom instead of into a grieving family home. The timing felt abrupt, too abrupt. Dustin began speaking almost immediately about legal clarity and asset distribution. His tone was smooth, but there was an undercurrent to it. Something firm, almost territorial. Victoria stood beside him, nodding as he outlined what he described as her rights, given her involvement in the business. I was still wearing the same sweater I had thrown on that morning. The house still smelled faintly like the flowers from the funeral, and yet here we were. They moved through the rooms with an air of authority that made my stomach tighten, opening drawers, reviewing files, discussing next steps as if decisions had already been made. Then, in the living room, where we had once whispered childhood dreams, Victoria finally said it clearly. I want the house, the cars, the shops, everything. There was no softness in her voice, no hesitation, just certainty. And standing there, surrounded by memories of the woman who had raised us both, I realized that whatever fragile thread had once held us together as sisters had finally snapped. After Victoria said she wanted everything, it wasn't just words anymore. It became action. At first, it came wrapped in legal language. Dustin would stand in the kitchen flipping through folders like he already owned them, calmly explaining standard probate procedures and asset evaluation timelines. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. Every sentence carried an unspoken message. I know the law. You don't. Victoria stayed close to him during those conversations, arms crossed, nodding at the right moments. It was subtle but coordinated. If I asked a question, Dustin answered. If I hesitated, Victoria stepped in to reinforce the point. Then one evening I came home, and my key didn't work. They had changed the locks. No break-ins had happened, no threats. Our Sacramento neighborhood had always been quiet. When I texted Victoria asking what was going on, she replied that it was just a security precaution during the transition. I wasn't given a new key. I had to ask more than once before she finally arranged a time for me to enter the house. Standing on that porch, waiting to be let into the home I had lived in for years, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about control. Victoria began going through drawers without asking. Filing cabinets were opened, papers moved. Once I found a stack of documents slightly out of order. Small things most people wouldn't notice, but I handled the bookkeeping for years. I knew how things were organized. When I brought it up, she brushed it off. "You're being paranoid, Crystal." And then, as if to solidify her position, she said it again, clearer this time. "I want the house, the cars, the shops, everything." There was no room for discussion in her tone. I felt cornered, intimidated, not just by her, but by the presence of a lawyer at her side. Every disagreement felt like it might turn into a legal battle I wasn't prepared for. My own lawyer had encouraged me to fight for my share, but at that point, I hadn't fully decided how I wanted to move forward. What I needed more than legal advice in that moment was someone to talk to. Someone outside the family. That's when I called Pamela. We'd been close since high school, late-night study sessions, coffee shop hangouts. She knew Victoria and me from before everything became complicated. If anyone could understand the emotional layers beneath this mess, I thought it would be her. We met up and I told her everything. How Victoria had been distant during Mom's illness. How she arrived with Dustin so quickly after the funeral. The lock change, the missing documents, the large financial withdrawals I had started noticing in the business records entries that didn't match supplier payments or payroll expenses. I even admitted something I hadn't said out loud before, that I felt threatened by the way Dustin spoke. Like every word was meant to remind me I was outmatched. Pamela listened carefully. She asked questions about timelines, about specific comments Victoria had made. When I mentioned the irregular withdrawals, her eyebrows lifted. With her accounting background, she understood how serious that could be. "I won't breathe a word," she promised. Especially not to Victoria. I left that conversation lighter, relieved. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't carrying everything alone. The relief lasted less than 24 hours. The next day, my phone rang. It was Victoria. Her voice was different, sharper, amused. So she began. "You think I'm stealing from the family now, after everything I've done?" My stomach dropped. She repeated phrases I had used only with Pamela. Word for word, my comment about feeling alone during Mom's illness. My concern about Dustin's intimidating legal talk. Even my suspicion about the missing papers. There was no doubt. Pamela had told her everything. Victoria twisted my words effortlessly, turning cautious observations into direct accusations I had never actually made. She laughed lightly at points, as if the entire thing entertained her. "You felt alone?" she mocked softly. That's dramatic, don't you think? Each sentence felt like a slap, not just because of what she was saying, but because I knew exactly how she knew it. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone, replaying the conversation in my head. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was cold. I had opened up about my fears, my exhaustion, my suspicions, And those private thoughts had been delivered straight into the hands of the person I was most vulnerable to. The isolation deepened instantly. I didn't call Pamela to confront her. I didn't send a long message demanding an explanation. I didn't give her the chance to justify it. I blocked her number, removed her from social media, deleted old message threads. It wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. If trust could be transferred that easily, then I couldn't afford to leave the door open. In a matter of days, I had lost my mother, my sister, and now the friend I thought would stand beside me. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. If I was going to survive what was coming next, I would have to do it carefully, and mostly alone. After I cut Pamela off, something inside me hardened. Not in a dramatic way, not in a revenge-fueled way, just focused. If Victoria was willing to mock my concerns, then I needed to know whether those concerns were real. No more second-guessing myself. No more wondering if I was overreacting. A few days later, I went to the back office of the main Sacramento location, the one Victoria had taken over. Managing more exclusively after Mom's health declined, the shelves were still lined with old binders, physical ledgers stacked beside newer digital records. It all looked normal at first glance. I started with the basics: monthly invoices, supplier receipts, payroll summaries. I cross-checked them against bank statements line by line, just like I used to when we were expanding the first shop. The rhythm came back quickly. Numbers don't lie, but people can hide things inside them. It didn't take long before patterns began to emerge. There were withdrawals labeled vaguely vendor payment, miscellaneous expense, operational adjustment. At first, each one looked small enough to ignore. But when I traced them back, I couldn't find corresponding invoices. No matching supplier receipts, no equipment purchases, no renovations that would justify the amounts. Individually, they were questionable. Together, they were alarming. Then I noticed something bigger: mortgage documents. Multiple loans had been taken out against the family home. Not just one, several. And the amounts far exceeded what the property had been appraised for. The interest rates were variable, meaning they could compound quickly if payments fell behind. I sat there, staring at the figures, trying to understand how it had gone that far without me realizing. The loans were tied to supposed business expansion, but I couldn't find evidence of that expansion. No new espresso machines, no renovations, no major equipment upgrades that matched the borrowed sums. The realization hit slowly. The house the one Mom had worked her entire life to secure was over-leveraged. If payments were missed, foreclosure wouldn't just be possible, it would be inevitable. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep going. That's when I asked my boyfriend for help. He had connections in document verification people who understood how to examine signatures and timestamps with precision. I didn't tell him everything at first, just that I needed a second set of eyes. We sat together at the dining table one evening, documents spread out in careful stacks. Transfer authorizations, account change forms, loan agreements. He compared signatures from older, unquestionably legitimate documents Mom had signed years ago to newer ones executed during her illness. There were differences, subtle but there. The slant was slightly off, the pressure inconsistent. Dates that didn't align cleanly with known events, like days Mom had been hospitalized or heavily medicated. When he pointed them out, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. Some of those documents appeared forged. Specifically, transfer authorizations that attempted to shift control of shared assets, forms that would give Victoria broader authority over accounts without explicit, verifiable approval. Then we traced the withdrawals further. Bank statements showed recurring transfers from the business operating account into a personal banking profile Victoria's. The amounts varied, but the pattern was steady, labeled in ways that masked their purpose, spread out enough to avoid triggering immediate red flags. Over months, the totals added up to significant sums. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was systematic. I expected to feel explosive anger when the numbers became undeniable. Instead, what I felt was something colder, clearer. The hurt I'd carried from her absence during Mom's illness. From the lock, changes from Pamela's betrayal, it began to crystallize into determination. I wasn't imagining this, and I wasn't powerless. I started documenting everything meticulously, digital scans of each questionable document, screenshots of transaction histories, copies of mortgage agreements, side-by-side comparisons of signature samples. I organized them into labeled folders, time-stamped and backed up, but I didn't keep them in the house. I knew better than that. I made physical copies and stored them off-site in a secure location that no one else had access to. I ensured there were multiple backups in case one was ever compromised. I treated the evidence like something fragile and precious, because in a way, it was leverage. And leverage only works if the other person doesn't know you have it. During this time, I maintained normal interactions whenever necessary. If Victoria visited the shop, I greeted her politely. If she texted about operational matters, I responded briefly and professionally. No accusations. No confrontation. I understood something critical. If I confronted her too early, she'd have time to cover her tracks, to move funds, to destroy documents, or worse, to escalate legally through Dustin before I was ready. So I waited. I continued closing shifts, continued speaking with staff as if nothing was wrong, continued living in the tension without letting it show. On the surface, I appeared cooperative, even passive. But beneath that surface, I was building something stronger than anger. A case, every discrepancy recorded, every forged detail noted, every unexplained transfer documented. For months, I had felt like the one being cornered. Now, for the first time, I realized something important. If the truth was organized carefully enough, it didn't need to shout. It just needed to be revealed at the right moment. The call from Aunt Sandra Johnson came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just as Crystal was closing the second shop for the night. The espresso machines had been cleaned, the register balanced the day's receipts sealed in their envelope. She almost didn't answer, assuming it would be another polite check-in from a distant relative, offering condolences months too late. But Sandra's voice was different, steady, purposeful. "Crystal, there's something you need to know," she said. "Your mother left specific instructions. If there was ever a dispute between you and Victoria, I was to contact you immediately." The word dispute hung in the air like a warning bell. Sandra explained that Denise had entrusted a sealed envelope to her years ago, long before the illness had worsened. It was not to be opened unless conflict arose between the sisters, and it was not to be opened casually. It had to be reviewed with legal counsel present. Crystal leaned against the counter, heart pounding. "What's in it?" "I don't know," Sandra replied. "I was never told. Only that it could change everything." They arranged to meet the next morning at the home of Denise's longtime assistant, Margaret Ellis, who had managed much of the administrative work for the coffee shops over the years. Margaret had been with Denise since the first tiny storefront opened before expansion, before the second location before success. Crystal arrived early. The house felt warm and familiar in a way that made her chest ache. Margaret greeted her with gentle eyes and led her into the dining room where Aunt Sandra was already seated. On the table lay a thick manila envelope. Crystal recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, to be opened only in the event of a formal dispute between my daughters. Her throat tightened. Margaret explained that Denise had come to her privately one afternoon years ago concerned about future misunderstandings. She had sealed the envelope herself and insisted that Margaret and Sandra safeguard it together. It was never to be handed to either daughter unless circumstances required it. Sandra slid the envelope toward Crystal, but kept her hand resting lightly on top. Denise was very clear, she said. This must be opened with a lawyer present. She anticipated complications. Crystal stared at the envelope for a long moment. Every instinct urged her to tear it open immediately, to finally know what her mother had prepared, what protections she might have left behind. But instinct was not strategy. She had already seen what rushing into confrontation could cost. Victoria had Dustin. Victoria had confidence. Victoria was counting on intimidation and emotional volatility. Crystal had something else now, patience. She pushed the envelope gently back across the table. "I won't open it yet," she said, quietly. "If Mom wanted it reviewed with counsel, that's what I'll do." Sandra nodded approval, flickering in her expression. It was the first time since Denise's passing that Crystal felt she was following her mother's guidance instead of reacting to Victoria's aggression. That afternoon, the envelope locked safely in her car trunk, Crystal began researching probate attorneys. She avoided flashy firms and aggressive marketing. She looked for someone methodical, respected, and discreet. Someone who wouldn't be rattled by Dustin Brown's credentials. The name Sandra Wilson surfaced repeatedly. Sandra Wilson had built her reputation on estate litigation, particularly contested wills and fiduciary disputes. She was known for precision preparation and courtroom composure. Crystal scheduled a consultation. The office was understated but immaculate. Framed legal degrees lined the walls. The receptionist's calm professionalism set the tone before Crystal even stepped into the conference room. Sandra Wilson listened without interruption as Crystal outlined everything. Victoria's sudden assertion of control, the lock changes the mortgage loans, the suspicious transfers, Dustin's intimidation tactics. She presented copies of the documents she had painstakingly gathered and stored off-site. Sandra reviewed them carefully, her expression unreadable. "You did the right thing by not confronting her prematurely," she said finally. "And you were wise not to open the envelope alone." Crystal placed the sealed envelope on the table. Sandra examined the handwriting, the intact seal. "We'll open this together," she said. "But first, we prepare." They discussed probate timelines, mediation procedures, evidentiary standards. Sandra explained how disputes often unfold, how aggressive parties rely on bluster. Early on, hoping to pressure quieter heirs into settlement. "Appear cooperative," Sandra advised. "Let them believe you're overwhelmed. Let them assume you'll compromise. Crystal felt a strange calm settle over her. She could do that. For years, she had smoothed over tension at dinner tables, absorbed barbed remarks without retaliation, carried burdens without complaint. Appearing compliant was second nature, but this time it would be intentional. A strategy. When mediation was formally scheduled, Victoria seemed confident. Her emails were curt but triumphant. Dustin's language was polished and subtly threatening references to efficiency resolution, unnecessary litigation costs. Crystal responded politely, agreeable, measured. She agreed to dates, she confirmed attendance, she expressed hope for family harmony. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, she and Sandra Wilson mapped out contingencies. They cataloged every discrepancy Crystal had uncovered. They organized financial timelines. They prepared for the moment the sealed envelope would be opened carefully, formally on record. Crystal never once broke the seal on her own. It would have been easy to justify curiosity, but she understood now that restraint was power. As mediation approached, Victoria mistook silence for weakness. Dustin mistook politeness for surrender. Crystal let them. For the first time since her mother's death, she did not feel reactive or cornered. She felt anchored, guided by Denise's foresight, fortified by preparation. The envelope remained sealed, but whatever it contained, Crystal knew one thing with certainty. When it was finally opened, it would not be in panic. It would be in control. The morning of the probate hearing arrived gray and windless, the kind of still Sacramento day that feels suspended before something breaks. Inside the courtroom at the Sacramento County Superior Court, the air was cool and formal, every movement echoing softly against polished wood. Crystal sat beside Sandra Wilson at the petitioner's table, hands folded neatly in her lap. Across the aisle, Victoria sat with Dustin Brown, posture rigid, chin slightly lifted as if the outcome had already been decided. On the surface, it looked like a routine probate dispute, but resting inside Sandra's leather briefcase was a sealed envelope. When the case was called, Sandra rose calmly. Her voice carried without strain as she summarized the dispute, competing claims over the estate questions surrounding asset transfers, and most critically, the existence of a sealed document entrusted to Aunt Sandra Johnson and Denise's longtime assistant to be opened only in the event of conflict. She approached the bench and submitted the envelope. The judge examined it carefully. Denise's handwriting was clear. The seal was unbroken. Victoria shifted in her seat. Dustin stood objecting lightly, questioning admissibility, suggesting procedural irregularity, implying that any document withheld until litigation should be scrutinized with skepticism. Sandra responded with quiet precision. The chain of custody was documented. The envelope had been safeguarded exactly according to Denise's written instructions. There had been no tampering. After a brief pause, the judge overruled the objection. The envelope was opened in open court. The faint tear of paper seemed louder than it should have been. Inside was not a letter, not a note of explanation. It was Denise's original properly executed will. Not a copy, not an amendment, the original. Sandra requested permission to approach and confirm authenticity. The signatures were intact. The witnesses were named. The notary seal was visible and dated well before Denise's illness had advanced. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. As the judge reviewed the document, the terms were read into record. The family home was left to Crystal. The vehicles were left to Crystal. The majority share of the coffee shop proceeds, including controlling interest in the business, was left to Crystal. Victoria was not excluded. She was granted a smaller fixed portion of the estate, a clearly defined percentage that ensured she received something meaningful but not control. It was deliberate, balanced, undeniable. Victoria's expression drained of color as the words settled into the room. Dustin stood again, this time more forcefully, raising objections about potential revocations, about later documents, about intent. But there were no superseding filings, no legally executed amendments overturning this will. The sealed document had preserved Denise's final valid instructions. Each objection unraveled under procedural clarity. The emotional gravity in the room shifted almost visibly. Where Victoria had entered confident, she now sat, stunned lips parted slightly as if searching for air. Dustin's arguments grew thinner, technical rather than substantive. Crystal did not move. She didn't smile. She didn't react outwardly at all. But something inside her, something that had been bracing for impact for months, finally exhaled. The judge confirmed that the original valid will would govern distribution of the estate. Just like that, the narrative Victoria had been building collapsed. And in the stillness that followed, it became clear. Denise had seen this coming, and she had already decided. Crystal didn't open the personal letter at the courthouse. She waited until she was home. The house felt different now, quieter, heavier, with memory. Late afternoon light filtered through the kitchen windows where Denise used to stand, coffee mug in hand, reviewing invoices or scribbling notes for the next week's menu specials. Crystal sat at the dining table and unfolded the letter carefully. Her mother's handwriting was steady, familiar. Denise began simply, "My girls." Not Crystal, not Victoria, both of them. She wrote about loving them equally from the moment she brought them home from the Sacramento foster system. She wrote about scraped knees, spelling tests, science fair posters spread across the living room floor. She wrote about how proud she had been watching them grow so different in temperament, yet once inseparable. Then the tone shifted, gentle but honest. Denise acknowledged Victoria's jealousy, not cruelly, not accusingly, just truthfully. She admitted she had seen the tension growing over the years, small remarks at dinner, stiff smiles when teachers praised Crystal the way Victoria's laughter sometimes carried a sharp edge when scholarships or business milestones were mentioned. "I tried to believe it would pass," Denise wrote. "I hope time and maturity would soften it." She confessed that when the business expanded and Crystal naturally stepped into operational leadership, bookkeeping, supplier negotiations, hiring, she had worried that Victoria might feel eclipsed. Denise said she had avoided direct confrontation too often, choosing short-term peace over uncomfortable conversations. "For that, I am sorry," the letter read. The secret will, Denise explained, was not punishment. It was protection. She had structured the estate to reflect contribution and stewardship, while still ensuring Victoria received a defined share. She feared that if control were split evenly without clarity, resentment could turn destructive. "I wanted fairness," she wrote, "not favoritism, and I needed to protect what you both helped build." Tears blurred the ink as Crystal reached the final lines. "I love you both beyond measure. If this letter is being read, this means something fragile broke. I pray that someday you both find peace, even if separately." Crystal folded the letter slowly. Her chest felt hollow and full at the same time. Sadness for the sister she had once shared secrets with. Relief that her mother had seen the storm coming and prepared shelter. But protection had come at a cost. Victoria's unauthorized mortgage loans had already destabilized the property. The house, leveraged heavily without sustainable income to support it, slid into foreclosure despite legal resolution of ownership. One by one, the coffee shop locations closed under financial strain. Vendors demanded payment. Lease renewals lapsed. Victoria filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy within the year. Dustin Brown, whose confidence had once filled courtrooms, quietly distanced himself when the legal advantage disappeared. His name faded from Victoria's side as quickly as it had appeared. Pamela stopped calling altogether. Crystal did not chase any of them. She let the silence settle. In time, she secured a modest lease and reopened a single coffee shop location smaller than before. Simpler, built on transparent books and honest margins. She handled the accounting herself again, hired carefully, grew slowly. There were no grand reopenings, no dramatic declarations. Just steady mornings, fresh beans grinding, customers returning. Crystal kept Denise's letter in a drawer beneath the register, not as a weapon, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder. Some things cannot be saved without breaking first. And peace, when it finally arrives, doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet. Thank you for staying with this story all the way through. Family love, jealousy, protection. None of it is ever simple, especially when money and memory get tangled together. I'd really love to hear what you think. Have you ever seen jealousy quietly reshape a family? And do you believe secret wills protect peace or create deeper wounds? If this story moved, you stay a while, like, subscribe, and let's keep having these conversations together.